It is my pleasure to introduce to you retired Lieutenant Colonel Harold "Red" Smith. He served in the U.S. Air Force and was stationed over in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. He's also my father.
Welcome. It's a pleasure to be here to speak to you today. The organization that I'm going to refer to were so classified during the war that very few people knew that we were flying unmanned aircraft in Vietnam every day. It all began with the shoot down of Gary Powers. The historians categorize special events or game-changing events that occur to really change the whole thing. A lot of you here, as I am, are old enough to remember the 1st of May, 1960. The 1st of May, 1960 was the shoot-down of Gary Powers in a U-2 over Sverdlovsk, Russia, on an overflight mission. President Eisenhower had scheduled that mission to give him the latest information prior to an anticipated summit meeting with Premier Khrushchev in Paris. Unfortunately, Khrushchev played the waiting game press releases. And Eisenhower had been told by his associates that the pilot had been lost, because it was presumed it was very difficult for the pilot to survive a shoot down of 70,000 feet. Well, he did survive and surprised the administration. Eisenhower had to admit that the story was false, and it drove the U.S. and Russia into a 40-year Cold War. A lot of you remember how bad the Cold War was. Because of that shoot-down, the people in the Air Force and the Pentagon were not necessarily categorizing it as an Air Force shoot-down. After all, it wasn't an Air Force airplane. It was a CIA airplane. It was an Air Force pilot that had been placed on reserve duty and assigned as a commercial pilot and paid to fly the missions. Gary Powers ended up in prison for over 2 years and was finally released in a trade at the Glenacher Bridge. Meanwhile, in the Pentagon, we had people in the Air Force in the basement of AFX OTR thinking about what they could do to stop the risk of capturing pilots. That was born a program called Little Red Rider. And a contract was finally allowed with Air Force money to look into the possibility of flying a drone on overflight. The tests were done. The program was well on its way. It was successful in defeating attempts by U.S. interceptor aircraft to intercept the drone after it had been launched at 1:30 out in the bay. And we had still naysayers in the organization, in the Air Force, and in the media. One of the things that happened, though, in 1964, with the heat of the Vietnam War, the drones were deployed to Okinawa. And the first sorties were flown over China at high altitude. Our aircraft, the 147B, and it could achieve altitudes very close to 70,000 feet, would fly 1,500 miles and take pictures the whole way. Those reconnaissance missions were deeply objected by the Chinese government, and the Chinese media constantly referred to the shoot-down and bragged about it, that they had shot down 6 of our drones. And the museum in Beijing has wrecks of U-2s and wrecks of drones. But on the drone side, there were no pilots lost. There were no casualties. There were no prisoners. Nonetheless, a press article was released in '65, shortly after we had begun, that said people of high places in the Pentagon are not sure that a drone's photography would be as good as that of a piloted aircraft. We all knew that was a buck fight because the camera doesn't know if it's being flown by a black box or being flown by a pilot. So we persevered in the South Vietnam, flying regular missions every day for a couple of years. But then along came the MiG-21D with airborne intercept radar, and they could indeed shoot down the drone when they were directed by ground control intercept in northern Vietnam. And so we had to look for a better way. And that better way was the same thing what happened to the B-52. The B-52 was designed in the 1960s, penetrating high-altitude strategic bomber to take the nuclear mission into the heartland of whoever turned out to be the enemy that required that action, namely Russia. The same thing happened to the B-52 that happened to the drone. They were at risk because of advanced electronics in the SA-2. The SA-2 was not really, that's the anti-aircraft missile that the Russians used. So it's not really capable in its early days, but Khrushchev pushed them to get to a point where it would reach the 70,000 feet altitude. And of course, the B-52s flew at a lower altitude. So the drones had to do the same thing. We put the short wings back on the targets. The original classified aircraft came from a target that was begun in 1948. And by the time that we were talking about flying Little Red Wagon, the drone had been well improved. It had capability to fly at 50,000 feet and high subsonic speeds. At very low cross-section, greater cross-section, fore and aft. It's very hard to use the airborne missile to find it. So we changed the altitude in our success rate. And this is a photograph. We can't have a screen here, but I'll pass this around. There were sorties flown every day for years and years and years at the low altitude. And we penetrated North Vietnam every day. And the best part of the operation was begun in '72 when Nixon was tired of the 9 years delay by the North Vietnamese to settle a peace accord, where the talks dragged on and on and on in Paris. So Nixon, God bless him, ordered bombing of the North. The B-52s went in on about the 15th and 18th of December 1972 and bombed till Christmas Eve. And it's been very upset. There are first-hand accounts of how difficult it was to be under a B-52 bombing attack. Each B-52 could carry 88 bombs. And I happened to be in the bomb at the time of that still and so then Nixon called it off 48 hours. Said, if you don't come to the table, we'll resume. They didn't believe it, so he resumed bombing again. And it continued until mid-January. And they finally, in the North Vietnamese, decided they had enough. Their infrastructure was literally destroyed. Power plants, bridges, military installation. In no way was the B-52 targeted against only military targets. The flub in this whole story is the only photographs taken of the bomb damage. It's called BDA, bomb damage assessment. Every day during that campaign, our little drones were flying 500 miles an hour at 500 feet, taking pictures where you could read the insignia on the uniforms with me. And those photographs were all top secret, and no one in this audience was privy to them at the time. Subsequent to that time, there was a meeting in March 1973 where the chief of the Joint Staff, Admiral Ford, gave a presentation to members of the House Armed Services Committee. And he said, "Gentlemen, I want you to notice that each one of these photographs says this was a drone photograph." It was a great day for the drone people because it had an uphill battle to persevere as far as we had stuff. The last issue in the drone business that came to the fore was in 1970 when Golda Meir came to Nixon and said, "Mr. President, please help us. We lost 7 F-4s in 2 weeks over Egypt." And that was prelude activity because the Russians were moving into Egypt in 1970. This little bird here is the U.S.-made drone. It has Israeli signature on it, but it was used as a decoy by the Israelis, who would launch it on a dead reckoning course to go over SAM sites, and the Arabs would shoot all the things they had launched and ready to go. And then the IAF, the Israeli Air Force, come and pound those sites so they weren't able to function again for some time. In 1975, Secretary of the Air Force Plummer, Under Secretary of the Air Force Plummer, came to our meeting. We had started a drone association for advocacy because there had been no one with advocacy in the administration and in industry and in the media because it all had been so classified. And Plummer said, "We recognize the Israelis were very successful with the decoy. We're going to look into that." 30 years later, there was a panic task to put decoys on Shock and Awe night on 19 December 2004. And that was when we launched 17 south and 18 north to be decoyed and disrupt the communication of the Iraq. Then the last incident that I was talking about was the efforts by Golda Meir. And several programs were established. In the drone program we had one. It was a strike drone. You all know now today that the Predator has dropped Hellfire missiles on the enemy, starting in Yemen, Iraq. It has been very successful even in the Syrian endeavor with the armed Predator and now the armed Reaper, which is bigger, better, carry more weapons. The strike drone program was begun in 1971. At the start of the year, we had 1 year to produce a demonstration that would fly a Maverick off a target drone, one of ours, and hit a target. TV-guided drone and a TV-guided Maverick launched from a DC-130. We tried to get the Hughes company to to bid on a single rail launcher because at that time there were only triple launchers that were carried on the F-4 or other large aircraft for weapons. They wouldn't do it. They said it'd be $1 million in a year. Our budget was $1.1 million. So we managed to modify an existing turret by sawing the outboard left and right laterals up. Voila! We had a single rail launcher. And we launched on the 17th of December 1971. A hit, and subsequent, right after that, another hit. And this is what the bird looked like. It's another target drone with a modification to carry the memory. Now set it off. I think it's sufficient to end this with the idea that at the end of the war, in 1975, Vietnam War ended in 1975, March 1975, the DC-130s and helicopters for mid-air retrieval of the ground, and all the maintenance people came back. They all were based at the base of Tucson, Davis Swanton Air Base. But it was disbanded because an agreement was made between SAC headquarters, the Air Force, SAC was the Alpha Command, and the Tactical Air Command, that SAC would take over the drone. That's letting the wolf into the henhouse. Because what did TAC do? They canceled the drone program. The United States Air Force had a worldwide leadership in unmanned reconnaissance and other special activities. And it was prematurely canceled. And not long ago, I met a general in the Air Force who was in charge of F-15 at the headquarters base, Langley Air Force Base, Virginia. And he told me, we were sure glad to see those drones go because we got $40 million for F-15 spares on it. We must never forget that it's an uphill battle to be an innovator and to try to do something different. And 30 years later, the people that still were around in the drone industry gave birth to predator players. And there are still programs on the way that will improve that capability and make it more survivable in a threat area. Right now, it's not. At the end of the Vietnam War, Admiral Moore directed that the only aircraft that could fly over North Vietnam during the bombing campaign were the drones. Some F-111s, because they were the only high-speed penetrator that could survive the barrage. I thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to speak to you. And I hope you all remember that it's really worthwhile to say why. That's what the board wants. It was coming. It's